Some brutal mistakes and a horrific night for both Julio and Teoscar Hernandez has all but ended the Mariners' playoff hopes. Let's talk about it here on the Locked On Mariners postgame show. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, September 27th, 2023. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners postgame show. Thank you so much for making us your first listen after whatever the hell that was. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew, rock with us every single day. Let us know in the comments below. I'm very interested to see how many of you are down there and still watching this episode. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. So I think we all know what happened, but to quickly recap, 8-3, the final score from T-Mobile Park. Astros beat the Mariners, and that should just about do it for Seattle's playoff hopes. Now, of course, we have to say that they're not mathematically out of it just yet, but this loss will now require a good amount of help from Arizona this weekend, as well as a big series against the Rangers. And, you know, while the former could certainly happen, I just don't see how the Mariners would pull off the latter, given everything that's happened this month and everything that's happened over the last few days. So, yeah, I'm heartbroken. This sucks. This is terrible. And this game started off so well, so hopeful. You had, the JP homer to lead things off. Bryce Miller was pretty much cruising for the most part to start this game. But then the wheels just fell off in the fourth inning. Miller gives up 4 runs on a couple of home runs. The Mariners bats missed out on some huge opportunities against Framber Valdez, who was terrible tonight. And you had a strike zone that was really working in your favor for a while there. It just felt like everything was coming up Mariners for the first 3 innings of this game. And then, like I said, it just all kind of fell apart from the fourth inning forward. So, Colby, I'll give you the floor. Just, say what's on your mind.
Yeah. Obviously it's really disappointing, to basically have your season end at home in front of your fans. Mariners would be used to it. It's happened 3 or 4 times in the last decade, but not technically out of it. But again, you probably need a sweep of Texas to have any legitimate shot at this thing. So yeah, it's a bummer. And it's not so much that they lost. Like if they lose 4-3 and they just can't get the big hit, in the 8th inning or whatever, and then it's just kind of, well, it sucks. It's devastating. It's painful, but also, they play a solid game and they lose. I mean, that just happens sometimes, but that's not what happened tonight. The Mariners played horrifically. They had opportunities to add on runs against Framber every single inning he pitched. They couldn't get that done. Some bad luck. Dylan Moore hits a screaming line drive with runners on first and third right at Alex Bregman. And, there was a couple of plays like that were made. But, that's baseball and you have to take advantage, and you can't put yourself in a position where you're playing from behind early. And it just feels like if they had gotten that big hit early against Framber, then they could have been up 4, 5, 6 runs. And then the game is completely different. But they couldn't. And this has been a pretty common theme for the Mariners all year. People love to point out like, oh, they're so good with the bases loaded. And I know statistically they are, but they have left a lot of guys on base, particularly this month. They failed to get the big hit over and over and over again. And it happened again tonight. And it's unfortunate. And I think the biggest, again, the biggest reason for disappointment in tonight's performance is the performance itself. They did not play good baseball. They were awful. They were 1 for 13 with runners in scoring position. They struck out 16, 17 times. They had one of the worst errors I think we'll ever see in right field. And that pretty much ended the game right there, because at that point it's 4-3. You're feeling good. Like, we've got this. And then a single turns into a triple, and the middle of their order's coming up, and you have to go to Brash, who, was used for 2 innings last night. And it just kind of all in Brash doesn't have it that tonight. And some bad luck. You have a couple of balls go off of guys' gloves and at the end of the day, that's it. So it was a pitiful effort at the end of the day. And the guys you needed to have the big games tonight, the guys that you would expect to have big games against a struggling Framber Valdez, were awful. They were the worst. Julio and Teoscar were the worst players on the field tonight. It was not close. Not close. And that is the problem. That is the problem of tonight's game. They just, again, they didn't go down swinging, right? They went down kind of whimpering and cowering and just kind of shrinking in the big moment. And that is the most disappointing part, because it appears that the team lacks heart. It appears that the team lacks, motivation. It appears that they lack, intestinal fortitude, whatever you want to call it. It just feels like they lack that drive, ambition. Again, it doesn't matter what you want to call it. But at the end of the day, it's a really disappointing effort in a must-win game. You couldn't play better than that with your season on the line. Devastating. It's absolutely devastating to go out like that. And it does open up some legitimate questions about this team going forward into this winter and into next year. And I think some changes will need to be made. And we'll talk about a lot of those, next week probably. But a couple weeks or a month earlier than we wanted to. But that's just the reality of the situation. And for now, you got 4 games left. You still have an outside shot, to sneak into the playoffs here, but it's not looking good. And it was right in front of you. Everything you could have possibly wanted was right in front of you on September 1st. And I can't think of anything other than calling this a collapse. You have 16 games so far this month against teams with a 500 or better record. You've gone 3-13 against them. Like, that's the ball game. That's the ball game right there. All you had to do was go 500 against those teams, and you're talking about clinching a playoff spot tomorrow, or even with a series loss to Houston, you're still talking about clinching a playoff spot on Friday night. It's a bummer, because again, this wasn't, you had a hard charge at the end of the year and you just came up, it felt like you needed another 2 games on the schedule to catch up, and you didn't get them. Instead, it was, you were the front runner. And when you're the front runner and you choke away the lead, it hurts a lot more than being the hard charging team at the end who just comes up a game or 2 short. And that's a new position for Mariner fans. The Mariner fans haven't been a front runner for the division heading into September 1 for a very long time. And that's what makes it hurt. So it's a bummer. I wish they would have played better. It was a perfect night for Julio to step up and shine. It was a fantastic night for, Teoscar or Cal or Bryce or one of these guys to have that big moment and kind of cement themselves in Mariners lore. And instead they played arguably their worst, sloppiest game of the year, when they needed it the most. It's unfortunate, but that is the reality. And it's there's a lot of explaining to do in that Mariners clubhouse.
It's such a disappointing performance, especially after what we saw last night. And we talked about it. It seemed like the life had been kind of restored in this ball club, that they got up and they punched back. But then they just reverted back to the same old crap that has plagued them this entire month. We'll talk about this a little bit, more later on in the show, but they have no one to blame but themselves for this. Really. They shouldn't have even been in a position where this game had to be the biggest of the entire season when they entered this month. They had a chance to put this thing away, a few days ago, right? If they just had gone off to a decent, not even a great start to the month, just a decent start to the month. That road trip just completely derailed everything. And they weren't able to recover from it ever. Then, you get swept by the Dodgers, you get swept by the Rangers this past weekend. Like, it just got worse and worse and worse. And we talked about it. You could not let it snowball, because once you let it snowball, guys are going to start to press. Guys are going to start to feel like they need to do more than they really need to at the end of the day. And we just saw that. We just saw that play out right before our eyes. I have a lot of complaints. I have a lot of thoughts on tonight, on this month, on this team as a whole. Um, I don't know if I'm really in a spot to properly express all of that just yet, though. I might need a couple days to kind of just process everything, come down from this, because it's been a lot of up and down with the emotions, and I frankly just don't have the energy to go over this tonight. As you know, we've done so many times on this show the past 6 months, because again, it's the same crap, different night. And I'm exhausted, frankly. I'm exhausted by the 2023 Mariners. I'm exhausted by people on Twitter. I'm exhausted by, the thought of entering off-season mode way earlier than you and I wanted to. I'm exhausted by all of it. And I just could not be more disappointed in this team and in this result tonight and in this result this entire month. But I'm also, not surprised. I mean, we could all see this coming. And yeah, the Mariners they went out like chumps tonight, and that's a really tough pill to swallow. It's a really, really tough pill to swallow, and especially because of guys like Julio and Teo tonight. They were dreadful, and those guys are supposed to be the ones leading this thing, and they let you down in a massive way tonight. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment, but first, a reminder: this episode of the Locked On Mariners postgame show is brought to you by Nutrafol. You don't have to choose between better hair growth and your health. Nutrafol provides a whole-body health approach for men that promotes healthier hair. No drugs, no compromises, just better hair. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve your hair growth, visible thickness, and visible scalp coverage. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men, and enter the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Nutrafol.com/men, promo code LOCKEDONMLB. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners postgame show. Thank you so much for making us your first listen after the Mariners 8-3 loss to the Houston Astros tonight. The Mariners have one more series remaining on the regular season schedule, and again, they're technically not out of the playoff race just yet. So if you want to keep on watching, keep on following along, you can catch the Mariners and the Rangers starting tomorrow night on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. Colby, this was Julio's worst game of his entire career, right? And I know it's a very young career, but this was, given the moment, given what he did tonight, or did not do rather, this was the worst game of his young career.
Absolutely. He left a small village of runners on the base, the bottom of the order, and JP did their job and then some.
Yeah.
Which, considering the lineup that we saw, a couple hours before the game, it was not what we would have expected, and certainly not a lineup that I think is appropriate to throw out there with your season on the line. But think about this. This game was played so poorly, we don't even have time to talk about how stupid that lineup was. But that lineup, the 7, 8, 9, and 1, they did their job. They got on base. Julio had opportunities to get big hits and driving runs to help your team win, and he failed just epically. Like every at bat was worse than the one before it. So yeah, that was unequivocally the worst game of his career. He'll have more games like it. Obviously every great player has terrible games. And when you say Julio had an awful game, that doesn't diminish how good Julio's been this year. He's been really good, and he's going to finish top 5 in most valuable player, and he should. And I don't think that, like, there's this idea floating around right now that Julio's 22, so you can't criticize him too harshly, or Julio has, been so good, even though he hasn't for the last couple of weeks, but Julio's been so good that you can't possibly criticize him when he doesn't do something well. And you absolutely can. It's accountability. And
absolutely.
You know what? Julio's not hearing any of this. First of all, he's not hearing what we're saying, but second of all, like, he's not hearing any of this and disagreeing with it. Julio would tell you straight up, yes, I was awful tonight.
Yeah.
You know why? Because Julio has accountability and he's a realist and he understands his role. You're the franchise player.
Mm-hmm.
Like, your stated mission is to give Seattle their first World Series. Like, you want to be the guy that everybody counts on. And when you have the J-Rod squad out there and everybody's got your jersey and they shower you with love and praise, and that's awesome. It really is. And we all love Julio. Nobody here doesn't like Julio Rodriguez except for the Astros fans in our comments. But that doesn't mean that you're above, criticism. It doesn't mean that you just get to enjoy all of that without any of the drawback. The drawback is that you have higher expectations than any other 22-year-old. And you invited that. Julio invited that. He welcomes that. And he typically plays it very well. Tonight was not one of those nights. So I just think there's this idea that, you say Julio's the worst player on the field tonight, and people love to flood my mentions and tell me like I'm a hater or like he's only 22. And it's like, yeah, he's only 22, but he's the franchise. Like, he is the guy. He welcomes that challenge. He wants to be that guy. And if you want to be that guy and you have the skill set to be that guy, and Julio has both of those things, then when you're not that guy, you need to be criticized for it. And that's totally fair. Julio was awful tonight. He was god awful. Just say it. Julio will tell you the exact same thing. I'm not breaking news. I'm not nitpicking. He was 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts.
Yeah. You're not saying anything that he doesn't know, that he's not acknowledging himself right now. He knows that he messed up. He knows that he let his team down. He knows that he did not do his job tonight. But that doesn't mean that we also shouldn't say it, because our job is to come on here and tell you the truth, right, of what's going on. To give you our honest
too.
Yeah. But
hold players accountable. Like, a fan doesn't mean that you have to blindly follow the players and just trust them and do nothing but praise them. Hold players accountable as a fan. That's why I don't get this like, oh, you should never boo a player. Of course you should. Of course. You shouldn't do it as frequently as like Philly does, but like, of course. Julio went 0 for 4 tonight with 4 strikeouts. You could boo him after this last strikeout. He earned it. And Julio will wear it. Like, Julio is not like a precious child who needs to be protected. He gets it. He understands it. That's part of the reason why you're so comfortable giving him all that money and giving him, just making him your franchise guy, is that Julio understands all that and he embraces all of that. It's not a big deal. Hold your players accountable. You have no problem holding your manager and your hitting coach and your GM. You hold those guys accountable all day.
You demand for them to lose their jobs and all that. Like, they're not real people who have lives and families.
Why can't you just hold players accountable, even the ones you love? Right. And we saw him do it with Felix at the end of his career. Felix was awful the last 3 years he pitched here. And it was just excuse after excuse after excuse. And it was just,
Kyle Seager.
It was the same thing.
There's so many examples. And I get it, because the Mariners have had such a poor history, right? So we as a collective fan base cling on to the few bright spots that we have. But that does not excuse Julio. And I love Julio. Julio's my favorite baseball player. Like, he is an amazing, amazing talent. He to me has the absolute ceiling of a Hall of Famer. I think he will be in the Hall of Fame one day. Like, I think he's that kind of player. But tonight, and he's 22 years old, but he's the guy. Right, wrong, or indifferent, he is the guy, and he needs to be the guy, and he needs to show up in these moments. And more often than not, we talked about this a lot during the first half. Obviously, he went on a historic run in the month of August, but more often than not, in these big moments with the stadium packed and it's a big game, and he's got runners in scoring position, and they just need a big hit. They don't need a home run. They just need a big hit. They just need to score a run or two. They need Julio to come through in that way, and he just hasn't. He just hasn't. He came through in Kansas City. He came through against Atlanta last year. But these instances are few and far between for a player of his status, and for the standard that we ultimately have to hold him to, because of he's that guy, right? He's supposed to be the dude that strikes fear in opponents when he steps up to the plate in a key situation. And right now, why should the Astros fear him? You got Hector Neris showing him up, walking him down after striking him out on 3 pitches, which was a pathetic at bat. And then he comes up the next time and strikes out on 3 pitches again. It was pathetic from Julio tonight. It was a pathetic performance. And look, the Neris thing, that's weirdo behavior. Like, absolutely, just the stupidest thing, the most like It's fine if you want to chirp at the dugout after a big strikeout, pop off, all that. Sure, totally fine with that. Whatever. That's that's part of it. That's part of playoff baseball. I get it, and that's part of rivalries in general. That's fine. I welcome that kind of behavior. But walking down a hitter after striking him out when you're not even like, it didn't seem like they were beefing beforehand or anything like that. It was just out of the blue. Like even Julio looked surprised. He started kind of like laughing at first when Neris was chirping at him. Like that was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. But if you don't want that to happen, don't have it in a bat like Julio just did. Don't strike out on 3 pitches.
Yep. It's, and this is a skill set like anything else. Julio can get better at it. And I'm sure he will be. I'm sure there will be stretches of Julio's career where he is, this is the guy you want up and all that. He's just not that guy right now. We've seen it occasionally. We've seen it for weeks at a time where he is that guy, but we've also seen it for weeks at a time where he comes up with the bases loaded and Ty and I are like, oh, well, double play or strikeout. What's it going to be? And it is something he needs to get better at. And it's something I'm confident that he will. I mean, he's an incredible player, but he's just not above criticism. He's just not above, honest analysis of his game. And it's one of those weaknesses that I think is present in Mariner fan base. Certainly. I don't doubt that it's not fairly universal, but for the most part, Mariner fans, once they kind of glom onto a guy as their guy, anybody who criticizes that person gets, roasted, for having the gall to criticize somebody who played poorly. That's part of the job. You have to learn to live with that. You have to learn how to live with, your failure and to improve from it. And Julio will. I'm not concerned about Julio long-term in these situations at all. I don't think tonight's game is the new Julio or anything like that.
No.
Come out tomorrow and you go 3 for 4 with, 2 home runs and a double. And I'd be like, yep. I mean, cool. I mean, that's totally what Julio would do. So, you guys just got to remember, you can criticize players, and there's nothing wrong with fairly criticizing a player who had a bad game. So it's not personal, it's analysis, and you watch it, and you can't tell me that Julio was good tonight. You can't tell me that Julio wasn't the worst or second worst player on the field tonight. It happens, and it just, unfortunately for Julio, it happened in the biggest game of the year. And it's going to take a while he'll wear that one and he'll remember that one.
Yeah.
But we're not going to sit here and not criticize the guy who played poorly, because that would be disingenuous, and you shouldn't either. You should criticize players who play poorly.
Yeah. Our job again is to be honest with you guys, and the honest truth here is that Julio was one of the main reasons that you lost tonight. And Julio has been a big contributor to the struggles over the last couple of weeks in general. Like, he's been really bad for the last couple of weeks since the Dodgers series. Straight up, I think he has 5 hits, something like that. Since the Dodgers series, he's been terrible.
I think he's had 1 RBI since the Dodgers series.
And look, he's not the main reason. He's not the only reason that you've struggled. Your pitching staff has been a massive letdown. Even today, your pitching staff was a letdown. Your defense was a major letdown. That was really the reason that you lost tonight. I mean, your offense definitely did not do you any favors as well. I'm not letting them off the hook by any means, but you really did lose this game because of your pitching and your defense. You're not going to win most games when you give up 8 runs. You're just not. But yeah, this was just a terrible performance across the board. That's what makes this so upsetting. And it's really upsetting to see, your star player choke, frankly, in the heat of the moment, and then get shown up by a rival. It was infuriating, to be quite honest with you, in the moment, to see that happen. And I wasn't upset with Neris doing what he did, even though I find it incredibly weird. It was just Julio struck out on 3 pitches, and then that happened. And that was just like, that's really how the season is going to die, huh? Really? Because that moment, like, I know it was still 4-3 at the time, but that moment kind of like that felt like that was the ender. So anyway, we're gonna tell you about Jace Medical here in just a moment, and then we're gonna wrap this thing up. I'm gonna put a bow on it. Again, first, a reminder: this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Jace Medical. Modern medical care and treatment are important, but our global supply chains are fragile. Things like pandemics, natural disasters, and foreign travel may cut you off from the treatment you need. Jace Medical is your solution for that. Just fill out our online form and one of our board-certified physicians will review it to determine whether medications are safe and appropriate. Then they will send your prescriptions to one of our partner pharmacies where your Jace order will be filled and mailed directly to your home. Everyone should feel empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace case. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical plus an additional $20 off by using the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners postgame show. Thank you again for making us your first listen after the Mariners 8-3 loss at the hands of the Houston Astros. Again, you can catch the beginning of their final series of the regular season against the Texas Rangers tomorrow night on the Mariners hometown broadcast for SiriusXM via the SXM app. So continuing our discussion about just kind of the huge letdown of tonight. It wasn't just Julio, it was also Teoscar Hernandez, who equally looked pathetic at the plate and obviously had an incredibly poorly timed error, just one of the worst errors you would possibly see, and that's where things really unravel, because that was right after the Neris and Julio thing, and then just if the wheels hadn't come off beforehand, they really came off in that moment. And Brash comes in, he's not able to stop the bleeding. It ends up going 7-3. They had the insurance run later on the Martin Maldonado home run off of Trent Thornton, and that's your ball game. Colby, thoughts on Teoscar and anyone else or anything else you want to talk about from this one?
Yeah, Teoscar was absolutely brutal and kind of continues the teeter-totter of should the Mariners qualify offer him or should they let him walk? Should they try and sign him? Like, it's kind of been the story of Teoscar this year. The highs are incredibly high, and he looks like a guy who can hit in the middle of a really good lineup and be that guy. And the lows are, he's one of the worst players in baseball. And it's pretty much been either the high of highs or the low of lows. There's been very little middle ground in Teoscar's season. So that obviously disappointing. The bullpen coming out and Topo was actually pretty darn good tonight. Brash just didn't have it, didn't have what you needed. But again, also some bad luck. There's, some line drives that, kick off a guy's gloves instead of going in them. And it's crazy to think what might have happened if Ty France had caught the line drive. And I'm not saying that Ty should have caught it. But if he makes that great play, it's, maybe this is a completely different conversation we're having, but it is what it is. Miller looked really good through 3. And then it just, once the wheels came off, they came off hard and fast. And, I felt like the game was over after the Dubon home run. Gino made it close, and I feel like if the Mariners had been able to tie it or take the lead there after the Gino single, it would have been a different story. But they just failed over and over and over again across the board. They couldn't get guys out. They struck out too much. They couldn't get guys in. They created plenty of traffic tonight. It was not an issue of getting on base. It was an issue of doing anything with guys on base. And, it's a team that if they don't hit a home run, they're not scoring 5, 6, 7 runs, which is kind of what you need from your starting pitching tonight. So, it's brutal. It's annoying more than anything. But it is the reality of the situation, and there's going to be some tough conversations that are going to be had sometime next week when we kind of start breaking down this season. Hopefully they pull off a minor miracle, and we're not talking about that for another couple of weeks, but the overwhelming odds are that, Monday we'll be talking about what went wrong, and we'll have to, spend the next few weeks talking about some potentially hard truths and get ourselves set up for a season, in 2024. It's more of an off-season conversation, but the future for this franchise is still unbelievably bright. Yep. There's a lot of things to be excited about. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of there's not as much work to do as one might think based off of the month of September, but they got some legitimate work to do. They got some legitimate decisions to make. And, some of the decisions are going to be hard and you're going to be asked to weigh short-term versus long-term and stuff like that. But we'll talk about that, more when they're officially eliminated. But that day, unfortunately, looks like it's coming sooner rather than later. And I hope they prove us wrong. They've done it before. But it's hard to feel good about this group of 28 guys based off of what we've seen the last 4 weeks.
Yeah. So we're going to take tomorrow off, just kind of refresh, and then Friday we'll be back and talk about what we'd like to see over the last 3 games of the season. And then barring a miracle, on Monday we'll do a mailbag episode and kind of have a postmortem that way. I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions about just the end of the season and off-season expectations and all that, but then we'll do an official like postmortem episode on Tuesday as well. And then we'll start doing some season review stuff. We'll start talking about the off season a little bit, but we're going to have so much time to talk about that stuff. And there will be a point in the off season where Locked On has us go to just 3 shows a week, but that's not until like mid-December usually. So we're still going to be 5 shows a week for a while here over the course of the playoffs and into the start of the off season. So like I said, we'll have plenty of time to talk about this that stuff. Before we hop off, we have some information here from Jen Mueller and Daniel Kramer on the exchange between Hector Neris and Julio. So Julio was not available post game. He decided to leave the ballpark relatively quick, but he did relay through a Mariners spokesman that he didn't feel like there was any animosity between him and Hector Neris, and that he was shocked that Neris did what he did. Eugenio Suarez apparently said that Neris shouted a particular word in Spanish. We don't know what that word is, but he shouted a word at Julio in Spanish that apparently crossed the line. And Julio said that he didn't think it was related to anything. He thought that he and Neris were friends. They're both from the Dominican. They share the same agency. He was really confused by it, and you could see his confusion on the field when it first happened. And you could see him like when he was walking over to Neris and walking over to the dugout, to the Astros dugout. It seemed like more he was just trying to ask for an explanation rather than fight him, right? Like he was just like, what's that about? So that's just weird behavior from Neris, who obviously has had beef with the Mariners before last year. He's a chump, like straight up. He's a chump. And if he said something that crossed the line to Julio, he's disgusting. So yeah. But I wouldn't expect any less from that team, quite frankly. So whatever.
I guess Julio was just raised better.
Right. So yeah, at the end of the day, we're about to get out of here, but at the end of the day, they have no one to blame but themselves. And like I said a couple of nights ago, everyone's at fault here. Some more than others, but everyone's at fault here for this collapse, for just how the whole season has gone, for how the off season went, for how the trade deadline went, all that. It's John Stanton, it's Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander, it's Scott Service, it's the players, everyone. Again, some more than others, everyone is at fault here for this. And so we're going to dive into all of that over the course of the next few weeks. So get ready for that. But like I said, we're going to take tomorrow off. We're going to refresh, and then we'll get back after it on Friday. We'll talk about the last few games of the season. And then, again, barring a miracle, we'll head into off-season mode and get ready for a very, very, very important off-season for the Mariners. So that's going to do it for us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners postgame show. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen after the Mariners 8-3 loss to the Houston Astros. Again, you can catch the Mariners and the Rangers starting tomorrow night on the Mariners hometown broadcast of SiriusXM via the SXM app. Have yourself a beautiful baseball evening, and we'll see you next time. Peace.